This is looking at a short extract from A Christmas Carol. Now we're going to focus on language analysis today, which means that this is useful either for practicing your unseen analytical skills, or if maybe you're studying the text, you may not have looked in detail at this passage, or it might add something to your study of the text for your exams. So first of all, if we look at the very brief section of the text we're going to study, and if you haven't read this before, then just take a minute to read it now, understanding that actually there's some very long sentences and some vocab or some ideas that you might need a little bit of help with, and we'll look at that in a moment. So just make sure you're reading the text through. Okay, so now starting on this, we're going to be looking for how Dickens is using language effectively here. And this kind of question is a standard prompt, a standard kind of nudge for all sorts of language analysis questions. And it's basically saying, look at everything that's going on with ideas and connections behind language, look at all the writer's methods that Dickens is deploying and what effect they could be creating, and let's look at the words selected, their connotations and their ideas behind them, as well as anything that kind of strikes us about form and structure that we might also want to comment on. But first of all, you've got to be able to understand it. So I would recommend kind of making a note of some of the ideas and some of the vocab as we go through, just so you can use them again and you can add them to your own repertoire. So we've got, meanwhile the fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses in carriages and conduct them on their way. So we can pretty much see here that we've got that meaning that the fog and darkness thickened. We're pretty happy, I guess, with what that's telling us. And we might kind of pick up on the idea that you've got this effect where people aren't being able to see because of the fog, because of the fact it's getting dark. And that in itself, we can say, creates tension, because you wonder what's going to happen in this possible confusion. We also know, maybe if you're studying 19th century literature, that fog and fogs in London were very, very common because of the pollution. And they're often used by 19th century writers as a metaphor for something kind of bad or something dark that's going to happen. So if you were studying Jekyll and Hyde, for example, there's a lot of fog in there standing for the evil of Mr. Hyde. Here you've got the idea that, things are closing in a little bit. This idea of people running around with flaring links, you might recognise the word flare in there and understand that it's maybe something to do with fire or shining. And proffering, if we knock that off, we can recognise the word offering in there, and that makes sense. So they're running about with something on fire, offering their services to go before horses in carriages and conduct them on their way. So if you conduct somebody through something, think of a railway station conductor. He's helping getting the people in the right direction, or she's helping getting people in the right direction. So we think, what's going on? And if we know a little bit about the context, a little bit about the history, we would know that street lighting wasn't kind of widely there. It certainly wasn't kind of on the electrical infrastructure that we have now. And it would have been more common to have people with great big sticks with lanterns on the end, and you could use them, you could pay them to actually light the way while you were guiding your horse and cart. Because if you think about it, horses don't have headlights, and this is quite a useful service, especially if, as we know, it's getting foggier and darker. So we've got people kind of running around trying to see in the darkness, trying to help other people. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible. Okay, now you'll notice that as I'm going through this, I'm kind of pausing in the middle of sentences to try and get kind of sense units out of it. Because one thing about Dickens and other 19th century writers is they write in really, really long sentences. So you're often going to have to take a moment to work out what's going on. So if we just look at this, we know we're talking about the old tower of a church, an old bell peeping slyly, so from sly, okay, I think it's an old-fashioned way of spelling it, down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall. So we know that the bell is peeping, so to peep, to kind of look sneakily and kind of trying not to be seen looking almost. We've got personification happening here, okay? If you are gruff, you are kind of surly. Surly means you're using few words. You're kind of rather than kind of maybe explaining eloquently or explaining kind of in a friendly way what's going on. So the bell is kind of, gruff. Its tone might be a bit rough and ready, but we're being told that the bell is always looking slyly down at Scrooge. And if we're studying the text, or even if we know anything about Scrooge as a protagonist in A Christmas Carol, we might associate him with that criticism of Christmas, the bar humbug side of things, and not really believing in Christmas. And therefore we could use this image of Scrooge almost feeling like he's being spied on by a symbol of the church. And we know that Scrooge is not really Christian. So maybe kind of Scrooge is feeling a little bit kind of like he can't escape this happiness and this kind of idea that he should be doing other people good. He should be acting in a charitable way. He should be acting in a Christian way. He feels that, even the bell in the church is watching him most of the time. We have the idea of a Gothic window in the wall. And if you think about Gothic, we're talking about a particular kind of style of architecture, so building design, as well as a particular kind of set of ideas to do with dark and spookiness and general kind of bats' graveyards, etc., etc. If you're talking about Gothic buildings, maybe Google Gothic architecture and you'll get a very good idea of what that kind of church spire looks like, the very traditional church spire, and think that's kind of got holes in it for the bell, and very, very fancy architecture. So the bell, it's always there, but the bell in the tower became invisible, and we realised this must be sort of descriptive. It's more metaphorical than literal, because the fog has covered it up. So it struck the hours and quarters in the clouds. So we know that it strikes the hours, and then we can think that that is the quarter of the hour in the clouds. So again, we've got a little bit of hyperbole there. It's not the clouds, it's the fog that it's gone in, but it's like it's been kind of taken to this great elevated position. And the tremulous vibrations afterwards, so after the bell struck the hours, so when you get this dong, it then going for the vibrations. Tremulous, think about tremor. Okay, so you've got these kind of shaky vibrations, as if, similarly, its teeth were shattering in its frozen head up there. So all of a sudden, this bell that's normally spying on Scrooge, this personified bell, is now actually kind of freezing cold, chattering its teeth as it is kind of relegated, as it's sent into this kind of high up, cloudy position. And just when you've got your head around this big long sentence and what it means, we get a very short sentence. The cold became intense. And the bluntness, the direct nature of that sentence emphasises the extreme cold. There's no fancy kind of big long sentence here. It's just the cold became intense. It's got a lot colder. So you can talk about, Dickens' use of a short, blunt sentence emphasises the extreme cold. And then we change the focus and we go from the clouds and from that idea of kind of the kind of maybe increasing threat of the cold and the effect it's having on the buildings. We look at the effect it's having on the people. So in the main street at the corner of the court, and think of that as like a courtyard. Okay, so it's not actually a court as in a judge and jury. It's like a courtyard. So in a kind of bit of the square, some labourers were repairing the gas pipes and had lighted old-fashioned way, a grate fire in a brazier. Now, a brazier is one of those big metal dustbins that you light fires in. Okay, so they've got basically got a fire contained in a metal bin or container, and round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered. Okay, so we know men and boys, fine. Ragged is going to mean their clothes are in rags. They're a bit kind of unkempt and dirty looking. They're poor. And this is how they've got to keep warm. They're warming their hands and winking their eyes, so blinking, kind of screwing up their faces, trying to get warm before the blaze. So blaze to do with the fire. So it's really kind of burning well. It's not a tiny flame, it is a blaze. And they are in rapture. So they're really, really transfixed, really happy, really kind of mesmerised by this fire, by this flame and heat. Now, rapture is a really good word to remember because it has religious connotations. Okay, so if you're seeing the word rapture, then in any text, then ask yourself, kind of, hang on, is this has this got the religious connotations that might be useful for me? Because, if you are transfixed in a near religious way, can we talk about the thing that is transfixing you? So here, that this fire is the most amazing, wonderful thing they've seen, almost with kind of near religious devotion, if they are in rapture. Let me change focus again and say the water plug being left in solitude. Okay, so the water plug, I think there wouldn't have been water in each of the buildings. There wouldn't have been running water in the same way that, we turn a tap on or flush a toilet or turn the shower on. No running water. Water pumps would be in the street, and you might kind of, know that idea. I don't know, let's do a spout. My drawings are not great. This is a handle, okay? And so you pump the handle and then the water comes out, and people would have buckets or kind of containers, and they would get that. So this is the water plug, and being left in solitude. So if you are in solitude, you are alone, and therefore we've got another bit of personification, because really water pipes, water plugs don't care if they're alone or not. So just like the bell was personified, we've got the water plug being personified. Its overflowings sullenly congealed. So if something congeals, it kind of builds up and builds up in a kind of sticky way, right? So if you have something that's congealing, say ice is congealing, you might have this kind of build up of ice on the side. If there's been a lot of dripping happening from a tap, for example, it's all kind of congealing. Wax congeals, kind of fat congeals. You can say ice congeals. So everywhere that this pipe has overflown, so it's kind of overflowed, these bits have, built up and built up sullenly. And if you are sullen, you are being sulky. You're in a mood, okay? You're being kind of whatever. And so it seems that this is to do with the fact that the water plug has been abandoned. It's been left by itself. So it's overflowed in a sulky way. And those bits that have overflowed have turned to misanthropic ice. Turned to ice makes perfect sense, okay? And it's this misanthropic that might give us a little bit more of a headache. Now, anthro is to do with humans. Mis is a negative prefix. So misanthropic is to do with feeling badly towards humans. So if you are a misanthrope or misanthrope, you are somebody who doesn't like human beings. If you think of the opposite of that kind of philia, love, if you are a philanthrop or philanthropist, you are somebody who is acting because you like humans, you're doing good things. A philanthropist acts in a way which will benefit humans. Misanthropists act in a way that will disadvantage them. So here we've got, again, the ice is personified as really not liking people. It's unwelcoming, it's unfriendly, it's cold, it's horrible. It's been abandoned in favour of the beautiful fire that everybody's kind of gazing on in rapture, that they've got all the attention, and this ice has got none of the attention. So we've definitely got Dickens using personification of the objects and the setting to show, how the people and what's happening in the environment in this cold spell. The brightness of the shops where holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows made pale faces ruddy, so that's kind of red, as they passed. So again, we've got the contrast there of the kind of fog and darkness at the beginning of this paragraph, and then the brightness of the shops and the kind of preparations for Christmas here, and the heat of the windows making people's faces red. We're ending on a positive note that humanity and people, society, is kind of overcoming any of the darkness, any of the tension of Christmas, because of the time of year and their goodwill and charity. So if you were looking at organising your thoughts on this, it might be that you want to do a paragraph on Dickens uses personification, and you can talk about the personification of the bell to kind of emphasise that Scrooge hasn't been behaving well, maybe, and also it emphasises how cold it is if its teeth are going to be chattering in its head. The idea of the water plug, the idea of that being left by itself in favour of people going and standing in front of the fire. You might want to talk about how Dickens is using setting in terms of the fog and darkness, and then the contrast with the brightness of the shops. You might want to talk about, looking at, there's a little bit of onomatopoeia, I guess, in here in terms of chattering. Okay, chatter. That onomatopoeia kind of reflecting the vibrations there. Even though this is a short extract, there's quite a lot to do in it. So it's giving you practice of unpicking 19th century text, of kind of thinking about how this increases your understanding of this section of the novella, and really beginning to practice breaking down something that you might have thought at first, I don't know what to say about this. I hope this helps. Bye now.